Hey everyone, it's so good to be back to having small groups. I know it's been a long break with the holidays and everything, but we are so excited about the next several weeks and the things that are coming. And so one of the things we are going to be doing each week is we're going to have someone who will be coming to you teaching a lesson just like this on a video. And it will have discussion questions kind of worked into the mix. And so you'll get to listen to someone teach for a few minutes and then have these discussion questions that you can go over with your group. And so if you're doing this with your small group, that's how this is designed. It's for your leader to be able to kind of press pause when those questions come up and for you to have those times of discussion and just kind of press in on the things that we're talking about. I want to just say though, if you just kind of came upon this video on your own, if you're watching it by yourself, that's still awesome. I hope you'll stick it out and just kind of stay with us through the lesson. But what you can do is just listen to the things that we're talking about and then just think about those questions that pop up and just spend some time reflecting on them. We're going to start a new series today that will carry us through the next 4 weeks, and it's called Vibes. Good vibes, bad vibes. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this term, but basically what we're really talking about here is our emotions. And so we're going to spend a few weeks just diving into this idea of emotions and how we should handle them. And so we want to start off this very first week. I want to start it off with this question for you to think about, and that is, what is it like to be under the control of someone or something? Now, you may have had several different responses to this, right? But if I had to guess, most of them were probably negative. Like, who really wants someone or something controlling them? And I think about the things that I faced as a teenager, or that you're facing as a teenager with, curfew, driving restrictions, attendance policies, things at school, trying to do school online, something I didn't face, or trying to just live through all of the restrictions of a pandemic. And so everywhere we turn, it feels like someone or something is controlling us. And the reality is we want to be in control of our own lives. We want to have our own freedoms and our own decisions. But here's the thing. As much as we resist this idea of being under control, all of us are. Every single one of us. And we probably would never say it that way, but all of us are controlled in some way or another by our emotions. And if you've ever been around young kids, you've seen this play out, right? Like, I mean, just take a kid's cookie away from them or ask them to share a toy and you'll see it. But it's not just a child thing. It's, teenagers and adults go through this too. I mean, we've all probably seen an adult that let their emotions get the best of them. And I think if we're honest, you can remember situations, probably recently, where you have allowed your emotions to get the best of you, where your emotions have allowed you to get in trouble. In fact, before we go any further, I want to take just a minute and think of just a negative emotion that has the most control over you. What's that one emotion that when you feel it, man, it almost always seems to take over, whether it's anger or anxiety or jealousy, loneliness, guilt, whatever it is. I mean, the list could go on and on. But take a minute with your group and just discuss, what is that emotion that shows up most often in your life, sometimes without you even realizing it? So we all have one, right? I mean, hopefully you talked about this, you came up with one, we all have them, but chances are we've kind of learned how to handle that emotion, right? To cover it up when we need to. And so for example, when we're mad at our parents at home, we'll slam the door, but if we're at school and we're mad at a teacher, probably not, right? We have learned to control our emotions and monitor our emotions in given situations, but we don't want to just monitor our emotions, to just taper them down from time to time and have them get the best of us at other times. We want to be able to control them all the time. And emotions aren't a bad thing, right? Like, I think we should probably cover that right now. They're not a bad thing. They're given to us by God, but we need a solution that allows us to control them rather than be controlled by them. And so that's what we're going to talk about in this series. And so I want to take a look at Mark chapter 7 today. And in this passage, Jesus and his disciples are together eating, and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, who are known as these religious leaders, ask Jesus a question. In Mark 7 verse 5, they say, "Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their food with defiled hands?" And so basically, there's this oral tradition that has been passed down where around this idea of like washing their hands a certain way before eating. And this wasn't a law. It wasn't anything that God had ordained that they had to do. It was simply a cultural trend that had been passed down over the course of time. And so the disciples, they weren't doing anything wrong. They weren't breaking any laws, but the Pharisees still basically accused them of being wrong and kind of throw this question at Jesus as almost a way of saying, like, this is your fault, right? And so Jesus answers them in verses 6 through 7 by quoting Isaiah. He says this. He says, "Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. As it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teaching are merely human rules." And then he goes on and sums it up this way. He says, "You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions." In other words, Jesus is saying you're not trying to lead people closer to God. That's what your job is. That's what you should be doing, but you're not doing that. Instead, you're looking at ways to point out everyone's mistakes so that you can keep people under your control. And that's not the way that God works. But Jesus isn't done. He keeps going in verses 14 and 15, and he says, "Listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside of a person can defile them by going into them. Rather, it is what comes out of a person that defiles them." In other words, God gave people this law because he had their best interest in mind, right? All these, the commandments, the 103 additional laws, all these laws that God wrote down, he wasn't trying to control and manipulate people. Instead, he was doing it because he had people's best interest in mind. And so Jesus is saying, don't you see that, whatever you eat, whatever you consume, that just goes into your stomach. Your body digests it, right? It's not that you should be worried about. What you should be worried about is what comes out of your mouth, right? What comes out of a person's mouth. Those are the things that defile them, which basically means those are the things that put you in conflict with God. And so this is kind of what he's saying to the Pharisees is you're so worried about what the disciples are eating. What you really should be worried about are your words and your actions, the things that are coming out of you. Because we aren't in conflict with God because we accidentally eat something wrong. We're in conflict with God when what comes out of our mouths and the things that we do hurt other people. And so when you think about what Jesus taught, one of the most important things he focused on is how we love God by loving other people. And so our words and our actions, those things that come out of us, they affect others. And how it affects others, that matters to God. And so when we think about this, what does this have to do with emotion? I think it's just simply that the source of our offensive words and our offensive deeds, those things that come out of our mouth, or the actions that we commit that aren't honoring to God, those things come from inside of us, right? That is, it's emotion that we're trying to monitor and control that wells up out of us. And Jesus says this in Mark 7:21. He says, "For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come." And haven't you probably found this to be true in your own life? Everything begins with a thought, right? Jesus mentions this. He talks about murder and adultery and greed and malice and deceit and all these things that he talks about. He says they start with your thoughts and with your emotions, right? And so he cares about what happens as a result of that. We let these emotions, these thoughts well up in us, they take control, and then we say and do things that we shouldn't say or do. And so whatever that negative emotion is that we're trying to monitor, whether it's anger that we don't seem to have control over, or jealousy that gets us in trouble and causes regret, or even fear that we have in our lives that consumes us, and we wish we could just kind of chill out, but we can't. Whatever it is, it comes from that internal environment, from our emotions, from our thoughts. And so for the next couple weeks, we're going to start paying more attention to that world that's inside of ourselves, and we're going to try to form these habits of telling ourselves that those emotions don't have to control us anymore. And so maybe they controlled you in the past, but the goal as we move forward is to basically be able to say we are not going to give our emotions that kind of power in the future. And so because of Jesus and what Jesus did, those emotions that we have, they don't have to be in charge of us anymore. And this doesn't come naturally, right? I mean, we live in a culture that doesn't really help us with this. It doesn't help us see and talk about the emotions that we have going on inside in a healthy way. But we need to learn how to name those emotions that we're experiencing and then learn how to keep them from controlling us. Because when our emotions control us, we end up doing and saying those things that hurt others. And so here's something I'd love for you to discuss as we kind of bring it to a close. I want you to take those top one or two emotions that you've had the hardest time controlling, and those emotions that just consume you and get the best of you. Maybe it's anger or fear or insecurity or whatever you named before. And I want you to take that emotion and just discuss it with your group some more. But what I want you to really focus on is how can you check in with yourself and check in with each other? In other words, like at the end of the day, how can you stop and say to yourself something like, man, how am I really doing? What emotions were a part of my day, and were they positive or were they negative? And where did they come from? And am I still holding on to them? And what caused me to feel them? All these questions that kind of dive into that inside with the emotions and the thoughts that we're having. And then maybe also make a plan as a small group to like text each other, to call each other, to keep each other accountable on those emotions that you're having the hardest time controlling. As uncomfortable as this may feel to do, there's a reason we start here, because these feelings we hold on to, they overflow not just out of our lives, but they overflow into the lives of others. They affect other people, and that's a big deal. And so we need to figure out what causes these emotions and how to handle them. And we aren't made to ignore our emotions, but we're not made to become numb to them either, right? We've got to find that balance. Emotions aren't a bad thing. We just don't want them to control us. And if we ignore them, they come back stronger than ever, right? I mean, we press them down, we stifle them, we say, well, I'm not going to think about this. And what happens, it just bursts out of us. And so if we numb those negative emotions, we have these overreactions, but when we numb the negative emotions, we also numb the positive ones. And so that's not a solution. And so as we move forward in the coming weeks, I just want us to take some time to think about this and to think about how we can overcome this with the help of Christ. And so I want to leave you with this verse, John 14:27. It says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." And so just imagine for a moment if that was our reality, that peace. We had control over our emotions. We were not troubled or controlled by them. And I just want to say it's possible. But it starts with us being honest about where we're at and with those emotions that have control over us. And so as we close this out, take some time with your group to discuss how you can begin to recognize and work through those emotions in your life. And we'll be back next week to talk about it more.